Hello, everyone, and welcome to our CEPT What on, on-demand webinar. We are just happy to be with you today. We're going to introduce ourselves first, and then give a little overview of the class, and then we're going to get right into it. We're going to try to do this in about an hour. We are not terribly rehearsed, so we're just going to try to wing this the best we can in one take. But I'll go first. My name is Bill Lockman. I am an architect. I've been a K-12 school architect for going on about 30 years now, doing almost exclusively K-12 school design. I've done projects from Maryland, Virginia, North and South Carolina, anything from elementary to high school, to stadiums, to anything a school system needs, we have done it. I've got 3 kids who are been through all levels of schooling. Got 2 in high school now, 1 in college. But so we've experienced, even personally, all levels of schooling. So then I'll hand it off to Jim.
My name is Jim Henderson. I've been with Mosley Architects, like Bill, for a long time, designing schools. So that's been my primary focus. I live in Virginia, and so my focus is Virginia and Maryland with the schools that I work on. I also have kids that have been all the way through school and into college now. I'll throw it over to.
All right, my name is Lieutenant Daniel Gordon with the City of Spartanburg Police Department here in Spartanburg, South Carolina. I'm currently the supervisor of crime prevention, also supervisor over school resource officers. Right now, we cover 10 schools with 8 officers.
Lee, you want to go?
Good evening. I am Lieutenant Lee Raines. I work for the Spartanburg City Police Department in Spartanburg, South Carolina. I've been an officer now for the last 27 years. I've been working as a CPTED coordinator for the city for the last 25 years. I have been involved with most of the buildings that have been built in Spartanburg, along with some schools, some garages, and so forth. But I have 4 kids, all who are grown and went through the school system themselves here in Spartanburg.
Very good. Thanks, guys. Jim, if you could flip it over to back to the PowerPoint. Thank you. Jim is going to be our producer today. So our goal today is really, a lot of people have heard of CPTED, and nobody knows exactly what it is. And everybody, there are different opinions of what it means, and we're going to talk about really what it is and what it is not. And there's a lot of things we're not going to talk about, so that we can really focus how it relates to school environments is our focus today. We'll cover the principles. We'll get into some specific strategies, and then talk about some resources. And I will tell you that there are, we're going to share some of our opinions today, and they are not necessarily the only opinions. There are opinions on all sides of issues, and they're all correct, depending on your different circumstances and things. So just with that said, we will share what kind of we have learned and what we feel like are things to consider, and then you can decide what is the right approach for you. Jim, next slide. Next slide, Jim. So school safety in general, but school safety is a continuum or a scale. We can do absolutely nothing and pretend like the world is a perfectly safe environment, or we could solve the problem and make our schools like TSA checkpoints. And you can see here, to totally eliminate crime in any building, it really would have to go to the level of a TSA airport. And we are not likely. Please, I hope this will never happen in our school environments. I don't want my kids to see this mean lady every morning when they come to school, and it's just impractical, and it's not the sort of environment we want to create. But the question is, what can we do that is easy, affordable, and what can we do to improve improve the safety. So we want to have safe and inviting buildings. There's three general principles here. There are our strategies, really. There are natural strategies. What can you do around the site? Just putting things in certain orientations so that there are good sight lines and there's good natural surveillance. You want to talk about territorial reinforcement. We're going to get into that a little bit later, but you know, the boundaries of your site. Is it fenced? Is it a tree line? Controlling access, you know, vehicular, pedestrian, limiting things, and then Jim is going to touch on maintenance and things like that. So those are kind of physical, natural site elements, and that it can also be translated inside the building. There are mechanical elements that, you know, we're talking about doors and hardware, locks, cameras, glazing, those kinds of things, intercoms, we'll get into that. And then there are what we call organized. So these are more programs and management strategies, staff, you know, school resource officers, SROs, security, police, things like that. Next slide, Jim. So over the years, it seems, you know, decade by decade, CEPTED evolves and has a different spins on it, but it really was coined and developed or introduced by Jane Jacobs back in the early 60s. She was an activist, and all these folks wrote books, and then the next decade, C. Ray Jeffrey, a criminologist, he took those principles and actually coined the phrase CEPTED. You know, it is crime prevention through environmental design. And then you see here, Oscar Newman, an architect, kind of took his own spin on it in the 70s, and then Tim Crow, probably the most modern interpretation of it in the 90s. So three books that are and people that really influenced CEPTED and its principles. But mentioned it earlier, the goal of CEPTED is to reduce the opportunities for crime that may be inherent in the design of structures or in the design of neighborhoods. And one thing about CEPTED that we learned in our training, you know, Jim and I been designing schools for years, of course, and learned a thing or two, but we have gone through specific training through the National Crime Institute of Crime Prevention, about a week and a half of training to earn our credentials. But one of the things we learned there was that CEPTED is really focused out about, it can cover neighborhoods, it can cover cities, it can cover projects small, projects large. So the principles are more about the outside of the building than the inside of the building. So we have those principles have been adapted to the inside of building environments. So the official definition you see here, CEPTED is defined as the proper design and effective use of the built environment that can lead to a reduction in the fear and incidence of crime and an improvement in quality of life. So I'm going to go ahead and go to the next slide, Jim. And over different states they talk about legislating it, you know, through the years, and not very many states have actually required it by law. Virginia in the last, I guess it was last year, has enacted some legislation. It's a little watered down, where it says it kind of feels like you must do it, but there's also the mays in there, and so there's a lot of wiggle room. Florida has a big push on that as well, and Texas talks about it a lot. But depending on the year and the state, there's really no law that fully requires CEPTED. And another thing that I don't say on this slide, but there is no true definition of CEPTED. Like if you're familiar with LEED, there is a system and a checklist, and if you do these 5 things and this prerequisite, you will get, you know, gold or platinum or whatever. CEPTED, there's no system, so it's all, you know, just a bunch of ideas, and there are some different opinions about it, and there are principles. So when you say, is your building a CEPTED building? Well, you know, we've done these several things that are CEPTED principles, but you know, there's no way to put a label, like a good housekeeping label on your building with regard to CEPTED. But it is a multifaceted, multidisciplinary. There are aspects of social aspects, you know, management programs. Maybe there's a neighborhood anti-bullying campaign. There are you can see there, we're going to involve all the different disciplines of parents, architects, reviewers, engineers, public safety, all that. Next slide, Jim. These are the things that we're not going to talk about today, we're going to try to keep this within an hour, but there are strategies such as traffic calming and benches and trash receptacles and bus stops and public art and bike racks and the psychology of color, and there's all kinds of other different things, but we're going to try not to talk about those so we can focus on schools today. And the strategies fall into 4 basic categories. We touched on them just a little bit earlier, but natural surveillance, territorial reinforcement, maintenance, and access control. So natural surveillance maximizes the observations and visibility of unacceptable behavior by the design and placement of physical features and people. The goal is to eliminate places to hide, hard to see places, and increase the ability for people to naturally see things that are going on and monitor what's going on. So it's really passive supervision. Territorial reinforcement is the use of physical features such as fences or bollards or berms or things to define space and to demonstrate a sense of ownership and pride. So somebody can say, oh, this is the school property, I better be careful or maybe particularly mindful of my behavior here. The goal is to convey that an area is not only owned and cared for, but that prohibited behavior will not be tolerated. So clear sense of ownership. Access control uses real or perceived barriers and other features to orient and guide people and vehicles along appropriate paths and to restrict inappropriate access. The objectives are to increase comfort and decrease prohibited behaviors by providing safe routes and restricting unauthorized access. So just how you organize the entrances of your buildings, where the doors are, how you approach them, how many ways into the site, things like that. Maintenance, talking about the broken window theory here. If you have a well-maintained facility, people are going to be less likely to vandalize it. But if they come up and find a window or a bunch of graffiti, they're just going to say, well, nobody's looking after this place. I'm going to have my way with this building. So keep your building, this supports the principles of keeping your building well-maintained, your site well-maintained, your landscape, and things like that. Next. There it is, broken window theory. I already touched on that. So, I would walk by that and say, well, if he can do it, I can do it. So next slide. Broken window theory. Presence of a broken window will entice vandals to break more windows in the vicinity. Vandalism, graffiti encourages more of it. Next. So we're going to engage our law enforcement panelists today with a few questions along the way. So I'll open it up to our experts. So here's my question to you guys. From a law enforcement and first responder perspective, what do you think are the most important elements of school safety? And I'll call on Dan. You want to go?
Sure. Of course, there are several. Me being over the school resource officers, I truly believe that that's a paramount for any school, the school resource officer. But there are, of course, structure designs, layered defenses. You do want to put some kind of barrier around the school so people know while school's in session that you don't need to be entering. For example, I've seen schools where the playground is exposed, and during the summer months they use it as a community park as well. Problem with that is when kids are on the playground, it leaves them exposed. And so a fencing around the area, again, layers, cameras, of course. And then one of my favorite design features, and one of the ones I'm really fond of right now, is I guess one of the positives of COVID is that not everybody gets to enter the schools. So everybody has had to lock the front door and think of a way to get in. So the cameras, like the Ring cameras or something like that, to allow access in. That's one of my favorite ones right now. And I think it's worked extremely well. So people do not have immediate access to the school. They've what we have a lot of times is a mad parent or a custody issue or something like that, and they just walk in the door and start storming into school. So again,
Yeah.
from a security standpoint, that would be probably my top 3 right now.
Thank you. That's interesting. You mentioned the layers, and that is something we're going to kind of reinforce over and over today, is that in a school environment, we want to create obstacles and layers at the door, at the front desk, at the entrance to the site. And we want to, for the most extreme cases, first person shooter type environments, we want to slow them down. We need to basically slow them down so the first responders can get there within, minutes to address the situation. So layers is a good point that you touched on. Lee, you want to give us your perspective?
Yeah, I totally agree with Daniel. Keeping things in layered, controlling, having a controlled access into the building, not just letting anyone just enter in any door of the building. I know there's a lot of exterior doors for fire and safety aspects of the building, but we want to make sure that when parents come to visit their kids or visit teachers, we all want them coming in a celebrated door. If we are able to control their access, you get them inside, and then there's another layer before you get in, you get buzzed in. You just don't get to walk through the door and then have access to the entire school. So giving that control is a safe environment without being like your TSA slide a few minutes ago, being so controlled where they have to be wand and searched, and it makes it an inviting place to come to, and makes people in the psychological way of trying to just behave the way they should behave.
Thanks, guys.
So you guys really teed that up for me. I'm going to start to talk about some specific strategies. And as Bill mentioned, there's no one answer, but we're going to talk about a bunch of issues that you should talk to with your design team as you're thinking about a project, and all the other participants in the CEPTED process. And we're going to take this from a layered approach, from the big picture to the smaller picture. So we're going to start way out at the full site context and drill it down to individual spaces as we go through, to kind of show these different layers and different strategies that you can use to have a safe building. So the first issue you want to think about is the context of the site. Depending on where you are, you're going to have very different issues. This project on the left is very rural. You're going to think about someone that's going to be taking a peek at this building, in the off hours, once or twice during the course of a day, and they're going to be taking a look at it from a road, but the rest of the building is surrounded by forest. But a completely different scenario and a completely different set of issues is a more urban environment like you see on the right. So people are going to be seeing that building all the time, and it's going to be accessed, or the potential problems come from 360 degrees. So those kind of very, very different approaches, and or different situations are going to call for different approaches. When you're looking at the site context, you want to look at crime analysis and demographic data as a starting point, but then you're going to also want to talk to folks in the neighborhoods and make your own observations. We're not going to talk about traffic too much, but I did want to touch on pedestrian access. A big goal of what we want to do from getting students from the perimeter site into the building is really define where we want them to go. So that's going to be through our sidewalk elements and landscape elements, really sort of providing a funnel to the specific places that we want them to go. And we really need to think about this. The meme picture on the screen, we don't always get it right, but you kind of want to think about how people are going to travel as you're laying out that site. Fencing is a big issue when you're thinking about the site perimeter. Some sites are going to be required. You're going to really want to require a perimeter fence, but some sites may not require it at all. Fences are good to delineate property, but they're also good to create barriers and also, again, define access routes so that you can really direct people to specific parts of the site. The type of fencing that you choose also says a lot about the value that you place on the site, or the image that it projects. Chain link is obviously the least expensive option, but if you think about it from a sort of a maintenance and pride perspective, would a more decorative fence set up a situation where people are thinking there's more value in this building and it's more of a problem to do any sort of mischief around the building? So kind of leaning towards a little bit more ornamental fencing in the projects that we develop, at least up close to the building. You want your site fencing to be something that you can see through. This is a not great example of a play area behind a classroom. They developed a solid wall, and areas of concealment are a big issue in school design, and so we really want to not provide those areas of concealment. So someone could hop that fence or hop that barrier wall and do anything they want without anybody being able to see what's going on. So really a better approach for a play area might be something like this, where you do have some solid elements of the site fence, but you also have that decorative metal fencing, so people within the building can see what's going on in the play area, and people from the outside looking in can see what's going on and monitor that. Site signage is also very important. I think signage at the building entrance, directing people to the administration is pretty much standard practice, but you also want to think about site signage throughout the building to sort of establish throughout the site to establish the rules of the site. If you are sharing, a school site and Parks and Rec type situation, you want to have some rules for the field, sort of delineating what is allowed and what is not, so that when you are supervising that site and somebody's causing problems, you can just point to the sign and they know what the rules are from the get-go. Transition zones are a big part of what we do when we're trying to define what is school property and what is not. So moving from the right to the left, you have the sort of the public realm of the site, and as you get closer to the building, we're going to use different design elements to really kind of tell you that you're transitioning from public space to more semi-public space, and then ultimately, when you get into the building, more private space. So you see this all the time in projects. The most common example is changes in pavement. So in this example, we have the drop-off loop, and we just have some regular sidewalk. And as you are approaching this school entrance, the sidewalk pattern changes to sort of cue you in that you're entering the school property or the more private zone of the school property. So you can do this with, most often you see it with pavement changes, you can do it with landscaping, you can do it with site walls. Just another view of that. That transition from the parking lot into the regular sidewalk and to the more defined sidewalk. And then that transition zone can be defined a little more hard where you need it. Bollards or knee walls or garden planters are good things to do to sort of mark that transition between, in this case, the drop-off zone and the playground. So bollards are really effective in not only providing that physical safety, but also that psychological transition that we're looking for. Eyes on the street is a very important principle of CEPTED. Bill touched on it earlier. We're really trying to set the buildings up so that occupants are providing the security. So in this case, they've developed balconies so that people are literally looking at the street, and you want to do that in a lot of cases in school design from a site perspective. You want to think about your administrative and reception spots, and you want to be able to have the people that are in the reception areas be able to easily monitor the traffic that's coming towards the building. And Bill's going to talk about vestibules in a little bit, and he's also going to talk about passive supervision a lot more. So sometimes the eyes on the street part is literally a street, but sometimes it might be something else like the corridor in a school and things like that. So we're going to touch on that a little bit later. Landscaping is a big part of providing a safe environment for school. We don't want our landscaping to provide any sort of opportunities for people to conceal themselves near the building. So we were going to follow in our landscaping choices the 2-foot, 6-foot rule, meaning that any sort of short bushes need to be less than 2 feet, and any sort of tree canopies need to be above 6 feet, so you have that blue area of visibility so that you can see all the way into a site. You don't want bushes that are in that 2 to 6 foot range that would obscure somebody within the site. So here's an example of some good landscaping. You have the low bushes that are less than 2 feet. You have some canopies that are not quite 6 feet. This is a righted installation, but as those trees mature, they'll get a little bit bigger, and you'll have that zone under the canopy. Also looking at that decorative fencing and putting landscaping, at the base of fencing to sort of soften those fence lines. It's a very good strategy to provide that security, but also provide a welcoming environment. Your landscaping choices, in addition to the sizes, you could also start to think about hostile species, and depending on where you are, you could start to think about putting some species around the building that people would not want to hide in. So not only the physical characteristics, but the prickly characteristics are also important to think about when you're thinking about landscaping. Site lighting is also very important in terms of your overall security strategy. For site lighting development, there's really two goals with it. First, obviously, is to illuminate human activity, but the second and big one is security. So when you're talking with your design teams, one of the things that you really want to talk about is the controllability. How long do you want the site lighting to go on? There's a big trade-off between the energy savings and the deterrence factor. Do you want to turn off your lights at 11 o'clock and have it go dark? More and more, we're seeing strategies where, especially with LED lighting, where it's a lot easier to do it, stepping down the lighting level. So maybe at 11 o'clock, the lighting level goes from 100% to maybe 50%, and there's some motion sensors. So if there's anybody walking around the building, it pops back up to 100. But again, you're going to save some energy, but still have that have that supervision level associated with the lighting. How the lighting is done is also very important. Really, the goal is really to get good uniformity and coverage throughout the site, so there's not any hot spots. So you're going to do that with high cutoff fixtures and really trying to eliminate any sort of glare. So if you had a patrol car swinging by a building late at night and you had some fixtures that were pointing right at them, they're going to be their night blindness is going to go away. They're going to be blinded by that glare, and so they're not going to be able to see people walking around a building at night because of that. So you really want that uniformity, and you want it pointing down instead of pointing out where that glare could happen. The quality of light is also very important. This is an interesting image on the left. There was a new parking lot put in with LED lighting next to the right side, which was an existing parking lot with high pressure sodium. So you get very different color rendering with the newer LED lights. The newer LED lights are more accurate to daylight. So if you had somebody that was, reporting somebody that was in a red windbreaker. If you were in the LED side, you could really tell it was a red windbreaker. If you were on the high pressure sodium side, it would be gray or kind of orange. You really wouldn't be able to determine the color associated with, with that witness report. So more and more the LED lighting provides that opportunity. And finally, we're kind of really focusing on limiting the number of entrances and access points. Often we get involved with campus buildings, and this was an existing site, probably had 25 or 30 entrances because there was 4 major buildings and about 14, 16 trailers associated with it. And so a lot of times when we come into these situations, our solution is to try and develop a plan that taking a campus plan to a single building, and that's what we did in this case. We added some connector pieces that you see there in red and kept the 2 major pieces. So what this allows is going from the 30 entrances to maybe 3 entrances that you see there in the red and yellow triangles during arrival and dismissal time that you have to monitor. And then once school starts, you just have that one main entrance that visitors have to go in the yellow spot, the yellow triangle, to really kind of funnel people into where we want them to go. This approach also allows us to really take advantage of some outdoor learning space. Outdoor learning in the COVID era is becoming really desirable because people want to go outside and still have class at least on nice days. A courtyard is a nice, secure environment. And if it's well designed so that it can be an outdoor classroom, we're really starting to see more and more people ask for this kind of space that resulted in this project. But portables are a reality. This is a project that was completed in 2005, and there's already 20 trailers are getting ready to build their second high school. So really need to think about your access points in trailer design as well. And oftentimes they're in parking lots, so you want to think about fencing the perimeter of your trailers, but you also want to think about how people are going from the building to the trailers. In this case, the access points to the trailers are on the right side of each of those buildings. And so people are walking down 2 sides of this. If we had simply rotated the 2 buildings on the right 180 degrees, we would have created essentially an outdoor corridor where all traffic was flowing between the buildings and could be easily monitored, instead of having people on both sides of the building. So just kind of want to think about the same strategies that you do inside the building, outside the building when you're dealing with trailers.
It's me, Jim. All right, so thank you, Jim. I'm going to touch on a couple more strategies that revolve around the access control element of CPTED. And so one of the catchphrases in CPTED is a celebrated entry. I heard Lee mention it earlier. We want to make clearly identifiable front doors, something attractive that'll bring people to it. We often get criticized or have to fix schools that have multiple kind of semi-prominent entrances, and people don't understand where they're supposed to go to find the front office and check in. So clearly identifiable. We've touched on, of course, we have to have exits to get out of the building for fire safety reasons, but we would like to make them just as minimal as possible. We'll often take the door handles off of those doors, so there's no way to even open that door from the outside as purely an exit function. If you'll notice in this picture at the front door, it's not terribly pretty, but there's a big number 1 on it. So for the prominent important entrances around the building or access points, we will number them and coordinate that with the local first responders so that they'll understand there's a fire at door number 1, or there's an incident at door number 3. Send all your forces that way. It helps with communication and first response. Next slide. Jim touched on security vestibules. We've been doing this for I can't remember not ever doing this, but we come across schools that you can walk right in the front door, go straight to the library, and just have your way with the school. And a lot of even administration and reception areas, main offices are, you have to go pretty far into the building to get to the main office. So these days, though, I think we're all understand how important of keeping the front office at the front door with a very visible passive supervision. Jim showed some examples of how the receptionist, just by the nature of their location, can see the lobby, the front door, and the parking lot. And even the principal's office, we like to put them out on the corner so that they put in some late hours and they have a window, can cover about 270 degrees of the site just by the nature of their location of their office. That didn't cost a thing. So specifically with security vestibules, we want to create sort of a maze situation. We talk about layers and slowing people down, but really with in terms of CPTED principles, we want to keep as many people out of this building as we possibly can that don't have to be there. So as soon as they get to the front door, that door is going to be locked, except during maybe arrival and dismissal. That door, they will be confronted with a locked door, an intercom button. Hopefully there's a video, like an AI phone sort of situation we'll touch on later. But there'll be a video that'll pipe into either the receptionist or the SRO. You can have the front door monitored by a number of different people, depending on how you arrange it. But let's stop them at the front door, and then we're going to buzz them in if we like them. We're totally going to profile that person. You never know who you're going to get, but if it's a guy in a long trench coat, you're probably not going to let him in. And even if, and some of your biggest trouble is going to come from your random, your dad, your regular looking parent. They're going to, might be going through some domestic situations. So you've got to be careful. So they will get through the front door. They will be sort of confined to the security vestibule. There's another set of doors after that will be locked from that direction. So they will be forced into the reception area, where the receptionist will do a background check on them. I think schools more and more these days, I haven't been to one in probably 5 or 10 years that haven't had a background check done. Lobby guard, that kind of thing. And then if they pass that test, there's another door up at the top of that, or sort of in the middle, that'll let the person into the lobby. And there are different opinions about where locks can be. Some people, that lock that's going from the vestibule into the reception area, some people will lock that door and buzz that one, some won't. Some receptionist folks are still pretty anxious and they want to be behind glass. So we've done some where they've asked us to put in glazing here, and whether it's got some ballistic qualities to it or some just attack rated qualities to it to slow them down, or some other conversations. So, when mom and dad are coming to drop off Johnny's lunch that they forgot, how can we keep them from even interfacing with the receptionist? Is there a way to put an attendance office with a drawer, like you see at the drugstore, the CVS, where they pass you a pass-through drawer? Can we do that in the vestibule? Could you do it on the outside of the building? People got to come in and use a public restroom. Maybe we've talked more and more about putting a public restroom right off of the security vestibule, so they don't get too terribly far into the building. And then we talked about A phones. So next slide. And then we talk about how these entrances are monitored. Is there somebody stationed physically at the front door that is dedicated to that function here? So you can see here, my arrow is not pointing here, but in the secure vestibule, there's an information station there, reception desk, and maybe this SRO is positioned there, or it's volunteers, or some paid staff. But you come to them first, and they get directed to either the office, or they can let them into the rest of the building. Next. There's another shot of that lobby and that station. So back to our first responders, guys. If you'll check your mute buttons. And we'll start with Lee on this one. What are your thoughts on how to most effectively implement school resource officers? where is the best place for their, quote unquote office? Do they even have an office? What are your thoughts, Lee?
I guess my thoughts on effectively implementing a resource officer is you got to have an officer that's going to fit the school. An officer's got to be wanting to be engaged. He wants to be there, and he knows that his position is a sense of security. As far as his location, his office, I assume the last slide you showed where an officer can be out, be visible, that's the first thing people are going to see when they come through that door is, well, this is who I need to see. And that officer is there to greet people coming in the door. I don't feel like if an officer's in a confined office somewhere, he's not going to see what's going on. And then someone coming through the door is not going to believe that there's a resource officer in the school. So the more visibility that officer is better for the safety of the school and for the safety of the people coming through the door. They may not do things if they see that officer when they first come through that door.
Right. Thank you. Dan, what's your perspective?
I agree with Lee, the office. We have various school resource officers, and each school is different on how they want their officer or where they want them placed and how they want them to react. I agree. I'm not big on the offices. Unfortunately, if you give a person a place to hide, sometimes that's what they're going to do. So they can be out of sight, out of mind. And I'm not saying anything bad about the officers, but again, if you put them in the back of a school or a middle of a school, their police cars out front. Most schools are really good about making sure that that's there. But even we have a couple of schools where the police car is not out front, so they don't know if the officer's out there or not. And we don't want to give that impression. So the officer being at the reception desk or being roaming the school. And I love the roaming the school aspect of it because one, they engage with the kids and the teachers, but also because kind of like our officers on the street, we don't want them to stay in one place, so to speak. We don't want them to be predictable. And so there is a fine line between that. You want them to know the officer's there, but you don't want them to be predictable as well. So again, and that's best with the school and how the layout is and stuff like that too.
Okay.
But yes, definitely have the SROs and just have them, because again, Lee hit the nail on the head with they need to be engaging with not only the public but the students.
Great, thanks guys. So we struggle with that when we're programming a school. They say, well, where the officer's going to put their stuff, their personal belongings? Where are they going to monitor cameras? Where do you put the head-end equipment for the video surveillance and things like that? So I love the idea of keeping them out. Maybe there's sort of a counter or a stand-up situation. There's a locker they can secure their stuff in, but keeping them out in the school is a great perspective for us to keep in mind. All right, we'll touch on circulation patterns. So these are kind of free things you can do. Just the way you arrange the hallways and circulation in your school, you can eliminate niches and places for people to hide and or fire guns and protect their positions. Sad to say, but here with a few exceptions, the hallways are straight. There are a few intersections where these red dots are. You can see you could have 5 staff people during a class change post up here and cover all the hallways, all the primary hallways in the building. So just with a little thought and good planning, you can do some free things that will really help your passive security in your building. And talking about circulation visibility, so here's an example of a primary stair. It's a multi-story building. So you could stand here, see down one hallway to the left, one hallway to the right. You could see all the stairs are an area where things can happen, bumping into each other and bullying and things like that. And not only can you see the stair, but these in the background, if you can see, there are the lockers. There are a locker bay, so they're not lining the hallways. So all the students are congregated in one area to some degree during a class change. These days, kids hardly use lockers anymore, frankly, but in this case, these lockers are low, so you can see across them, and there's less places to hide. And these kind of features and layouts improve first responder response times. here's an example of a front entrance. This is happens to be a renovation, so there's some limitations with the configurations here. But where we put in a new stair, we made the treads transparent with this punched metal here. So you can see a first responder coming in to clear the building could see through that stair and see that there's not somebody waiting to jump out at them, things like that. Next slide. The width of corridors, CPTED talks about things. We talked about the social management and programs. Anti-bullying is a huge thing in the school environment. If you talk about other schools, there's things like sexual harassment. And there's all kinds of crime that happens that doesn't involve a weapon or a physical contact, but there's psychological crime going on. So we keep our corridors wide, as appropriately wide as possible, to give room for students to get past each other. So that the main corridors are wider, the secondary corridors might get a little narrower, things like that. But we also try to loop things so that there's donuts and you can go, there's two ways to get everywhere. That limits the interaction. But when there's a lot of dead end corridors, you end up you have to go down the corridor, turn around and come back. It creates a lot of opportunity for conflict. So next. Transparency is a great debate in school security, and what we have learned through our experts at the National Institute of Crime Prevention is that they encourage transparency. When it comes to between the corridor and the classroom, they want to have a window in the door, maybe a side light, things like that. And then somebody will say, well, the first shooter's going to come through, active shooter's going to come through and pop that window and into that classroom. But what we hear from the experts are that, by the time we've slowed the guy down at the couple of layers at the front door, they're in the building for, they should be confronted by a first responder within 5 minutes. So we will have slowed them down. And when the first responder comes in, we want them to get through that building quickly. So they're coming down the hallways, looking and seeing that room is safe, that room is clear, then get through the building quickly and get to the incident and address it. And I will encourage our experts here to chime in on that at this time if you'd like to, guys. Otherwise, I'll keep on going. But the transparency celebrates active learning. What else here? So here's an example of a display case in a hallway into, I think that's an art room that's got glass on both sides, so you can see through the display into the classroom. So good examples of transparency. Next. Talk about some view shadows. So these classrooms have glass in the doors, little side lights there, and they're recessed. But you can see by the angles, that class could hide in those gray areas and be obscured from view from any incidents in the hallways, any criminals. And you can even do that in the floor pattern. Some more examples of passive supervision. So we'll do these. This is a STEM school, so STEM environment, and we'll create these collaboration spaces and create little fish bowls at key points in the circulation area. So you can see just walking down the hallway what those kids are up to, and maybe there's a teacher in there and they can see what's going on in the hallway from that room. So outside in, inside out. Next. Here is a teacher workroom that has a nice window out onto the playground and the outdoor learning space there. So a good example of passive supervision. Next. And here's one I really like. This is a media center, and we put a counter along the window, sort of a stand-up bar height with the tall stools there, so kids can either work on their computers or read. And while they're there, they see the bus loop or the parking lot. You can see what's going on. Not only the students, but the staff can also. So just kind of, free play. Had to put that counter somewhere, so let's put it on the window and take advantage of the passive qualities of it. Next.
So with all that glass, obviously people are concerned about how somebody in the building might react to that. And so more and more we're looking at ways to very quickly isolate different wings of the building. So here's an example of a floor plan of a school, and an administrator or receptionist can either hit a panic button that's physically located somewhere or on their mobile device, and all these cross corridor doors would close at once. And what that allows us to do is to take this whole first floor footprint, and once those doors close, there's 8 different zones that are totally isolated from each other, or 9 different zones that are totally isolated from each other, so that if someone's in the building, they can only travel within that particular zone, and the rest of the occupants are safe. This is very complicated, and you got to think through this quite a bit with regard to how your life safety still works. But generally, when these cross corridor doors close, they would be locked from the pull side and open from the push side in case you had to get out. So kind of looking at this a little bit closer from just one little grade pod in this project. So that's that same grade pod and sort of an axonometric view, and the corridors at the bottom. And when that panic button gets pushed, these doors would close, and it creates this barrier between the corridor and that pod, because more and more, especially like in this example, this grade pod has 4 classrooms and a science lab that open up onto an open space. And so how do we secure that open space? These panic buttons and isolating different wings allows that to happen. And so once those doors close, they can get the instructions from the administration, whether they're going to stay in their classroom or if they're directed to flee. There's a back stair in the top right that they can all get out of the building without crossing that barrier that the panic button has provided them. Shared use of facilities is also a big way to keep more people at the building, supervising the building for longer periods of time. So Parks and Rec is always a big one. So this is a shared school with a school with a blue entrance, and the Parks and Rec at the red entrance, and the sort of aqua part is the Parks and Rec program. So again, it's just putting more hours, activating the site with more hours, more people, so that there's more people watching what's going on there. Taking it to another level, some school systems will either put an apartment inside a building or in the corner of a building. So the top right, you see that red circle, that's an actual 1-bedroom apartment that they rent out, so that there's someone there all the time. So they do this at the middle schools, and then at the high schools, they actually have like a little outbuilding house situated on the site so that there's someone there all the time. Bill mentioned bullying, and bathrooms are a big challenge. A lot of conversations need to be had around bathrooms with your design professional. We're seeing a trend more and more towards being able to see the hand washing station from the corridor, or maybe even pulling the hand washing station out into the corridor and just having the bathrooms be in the water closets and urinals just be in the totally enclosed area, so that a lot of the bullying effects that happen in bathrooms can be deterred quite a bit. You want to have conversations with your design team about whether you're going to go with a maze or a locked door approach. There's advantages and disadvantages to each of those approaches. Bill touched on lockers. Lockers is a big discussion on every project. Locker use is going away quite a bit. And the days of providing a locker for every student, like a 1-to-1 ratio for every student in the school, are going away. Now we're seeing like 25% of the population might have a locker. But there's different approaches. The old school line down the corridor gives people a little more space unless you're stacked on the right. So you still have the opportunity to bump into people and jostle around. So there are challenges with that. The locker bank approach in the top right, we're seeing more and more because it gives you opportunity for one person to supervise all the lockers in a certain part of the building pretty easily. And we're also, providing those those turn into also sort of like extended learning type spaces, because kids can plug in laptops and work on top of those, not during a class change. What's important with those sort of locker bank approaches is to make them generous. You don't want to make them so tight that people are bumping into each other trying to get into lockers. So you really need to think about the spacing. And probably a future trend that we might see is more of like the airport or bus stop type checkout, where students don't own a locker, they just own it for a certain period of time. So that trend is probably coming, not quite here yet.
All right, so I'm gonna talk about some of the mechanical strategies and hardening and active strategies. Next slide. So we talked about glazing and glass a lot, and people sort of automatically jump to the conclusion that all of our windows need to be bullet resistant, or they need to be bullet resistant at the front door and at the reception area. And bullet resistance, there are varying degrees of bullet resistance and bullet proofing. And to truly have a bulletproof facility costs, next, click the button for me, Jim, $200 a square foot of glass, and is super impractical. You can see there at the top that glass is several inches thick. It is you think about the president's motorcade, those are bulletproof. We will never have bulletproof schools, but what we need to do is balance the efficacy and the cost of these things. And we talk about time. We just want to buy time, slow these folks down, so that our first responders can get there and address the situation. So we're going to talk about bullet resistance. And this chart here talks about the different classes. And class 3 talks about handguns, and that's probably what our understanding is the most common weapon that you might see in the school. So any discussions that we have generally revolve around a class 3 bullet resistance. Next slide. So for an alternative that is more affordable and quite effective is what we call attack rated glazing. And it can come in the form of, whether it's a new facility or a retrofit. There are all these different vendors here you see on the screen there. School Guard is a pretty popular one, but it is basically 2 layers of glass, and in between there is a layer of film, and it's relatively thin. It's, it looks like regular glass. So you'd walk by the school and you wouldn't know that it is a very safe area. And it'll take a very strong man with several bats and guns and 10 or 15 minutes, I forget, you can watch these videos, but it'll take so long for that person to get through that opening that they will move on. So it's relatively affordable. There's a spec there that we use. There are competing products, but the last school we did this on, it came in at about $50 a square foot of the actual surface area of the glass. We did it around a gym. The 2 main entrances to a gym lobby. It was a gym edition. So it's not free, but it is affordable, and you can use it selectively, particularly at your front entrance, at your secure vestibule, just all 4 sides of that and the reception area. But likely the incident is going to happen in a few key areas that you can address. Next slide.
Bill, I think it's important to mention that, with these type products, a bullet will go through them.
Yeah.
You didn't mention that part. A bullet will go through it, but it's not going to shatter the glass. It's not going to make a big hole. They're going to have to shoot it a lot and then hit it with a hammer or baseball bat to actually get through. So I just want to make that.
Thank you for that clarification, Jim. You always got my back. Next, here there are some ready-made doors that are not terribly sexy, but they are quite effective and attack resistant. Masonite makes this product, and there's other competing products. But again, we're talking about slowing people down and buying time, and these doors do it. And there's a slight upcharge. I think it might have been 40% or something like that, but it was pretty reasonable, as I recall. Next. and there's, sadly, with all of our shooting incidents at schools, that everybody first goes to, how do we lock the classroom doors? Now, I cannot barricade myself in my classroom because I don't have the right hardware. And so you see all these different pictures on the internet of people very smart and innovative ways of providing, barricading doors and things, but we are competing with other safety concerns like fire. And, if these doors have locks like this, they will not be in compliance with the building code. You would, during a fire incident, you would very possibly kill, many people. So there are ways to legally lock a classroom effectively, and we'll talk about that on the next slide. Next, please. Thank you. And this is just one vendor, but all the different hardware vendors provide all varieties of different locking functions. And there's one that's called a classroom security lock, which sounds pretty good. And you can see there in the diagram, I wish I could point at it, but in the middle of the screen, on the left there's a key on the inside. And to lock that door and unlock that door, you have to have a key in your hand on the inside and the outside of that door. So that is one very effective way to control that lock. I first will have an opinion that a storeroom lock would be a good way to do it. That door on the outside, on the corridor side, would always be locked, and it would probably drive the teachers up a wall, but that door will never be unlocked. And I think it should have a closer on it. So that door will always shut unless somebody overrides it with a little foot wedge or wooden wedge or something like that. But I personally think every corridor, classroom door should be locked 24/7 and only unlocked with a key or let in from the inside by someone who knows you. Next slide. I think I'm going to ask don't forget the closer. Thank you. So I'm going to ask our first responder. I'll start with Daniel. Dan, what are your thoughts on locking classroom doors and windows into classrooms from the corridor? And feel free to contradict everything I just said.
No, I think me and Lee were talking about this earlier, and we're both in agreement with locking the classroom doors because, again, it limits access from the outside and the inside. I agree with having a small window so that you can see inside, especially for the SRO, to make sure everything's okay. I know there are color-coded systems and stuff like that to assure that everybody's okay. So again, there's different routes to take on that. I do want to say something about the previous slide with the door locks and the little wedges and stuff like that secure the doors. We were talking to a school a while back, one of our smaller schools, and they were wondering if they should invest in it. The problem you have with that sometimes is, are they trained in a traumatic situation to be able to think about doing that in the first place? So that's one thing you just want to consider, is how often are they going to be trained into this type of scenario where something's happened, they call a code, and they know automatically what to do. Everybody's freaking out and they got kids panicking or something like that. So I am with the locked doors as well.
Good, thank you. Lee, what do you think?
I totally agree with Daniel. Some of the issues, some of the active shooter training classes that I've taught in the past, we've talked about Sandy Hook School, where there's one teacher up there. She basically locked all of her 15 little kids into that classroom, at little bitty bathroom in there, and wouldn't let anybody in there. So she denied access to anybody getting in there. These classroom doors they need to stay locked from the corridor, because that's one less thing that a teacher has to do during a stressful situation that she may not, like Daniel said, be trained on how to do and how to stay calm. Because it's one thing talking about all this, it's actually being involved in something like that going on. And that's just one element. If that door is always locked when the class is in session, that's one less thing that they have to do. Most doors and schools open into the hallway. Some of those devices you saw up there, they're good. They're good as far as safety goes when police are involved. But you're right, when fire department and the safety of fire it's kind of hard for them to get grasp around some of those devices. We know that our job as law enforcement is to keep the offender, the violator out of the classroom. And of course, the fire department is trying to get people out of the classroom. We've also talked about, should schools pull fire alarms? Our thought process behind all this is that when you pull a fire alarm when there's an active shooter inside the building, guess who's coming first? It's going to be the fire department instead of someone calling 911 and getting someone on the way. So that's how the shooter in Parkland, Florida, was able to have as many victims as he did, is because he pulled the fire alarm.
Oh, interesting. Great. Good perspective, guys. Thank you. Next slide, Jim. So it's interesting you mentioned the fire alarm. I'm going to touch on that in a minute. So here's some other hardware elements and solutions and just things to think about. So talked about a transaction counter. It feels a little institutional, but that is one way to prevent one layer of interaction. And this is where you can drop off the homework that they forgot, or the Chick-fil-A or whatever, and it can go through a door, and there's just no opportunity for any kind of interaction, physical interaction there. The A-phone, I don't even know how you say that, AI phone. A-phone is a very popular element at the front door. It's a doorbell. It's your ring doorbell. Doorbell video comes up on either receptionist or multiple devices in the office, in the school. Those are pretty ubiquitous at this point. In the middle there, I've got my favorite picture is a lockdown button. And I believe we have way too many fire alarms, and we could talk about this all day long, but the code says you need to have a certain number of pull stations that basically almost every door in a school building, exterior door, is supposed to have, somebody could say that requires a pull station. Some people could argue the code that you only need one at the main entrance. And all that wiring is could be repurposed to have a lockdown button. And you could put these in strategic places in the school so that when something happens, anybody, a student, a teacher, and people could disagree with me, could activate this button and blue lights would go off, certain messages would go off, that first responders would be called immediately. And then you think about, well, how could this be abused? Make sure there's a camera pointing right at that button. So, if Johnny or Sally play with that button, they're going to be, expelled, suspended, or whatever. So there are ways to activate emergency procedures as quickly as possible throughout a building. So a lockdown button is one way lockdown buttons, plural, are one way to do that. You see the access control. I guess we're going to talk about that in a minute. Don't forget the walls. So even if your school, a lot of our schools are made of concrete block, which has great attack resistance and bullet resistance. But some schools have drywall features or things like that, and bullets will go right through drywall. Just took a class last month and saw 4 layers of 1/2-inch drywall, 2 different walls. A handgun is going to go through one wall and then a second wall and then hit its target. So armor core is a layer of material you can build, excuse me, you can build into your drywall walls to have some added protection. What else here? There's new technologies with Bluetooth. Your phone devices can provide access control and things like that. So cameras, we're not going to spend a whole lot of time talking about that because cameras are quite ubiquitous now. One thing we just want to make sure you understand is that cameras are a little bit of a deterrent. Somebody sees a camera, they're going to either be more careful, but cameras don't really stop crime. They just capture it on film, and you can see it, what happened, when it happened. And it's even, it's very difficult to even prosecute with this footage unless you've got a great picture of the person's face and high, good definition at a good angle. You can't prove hardly anything. So cameras are great, they're convenient, but they are kind of after the fact, what happened, not going to stop it, and it's probably not even going to help you prosecute. Next, access control. There's a lot of different ways to do this with, there's card readers. You can see an example there. what we see most often these days is teachers having badges that gives them access to doors and things like that. But we're starting to see a trend where you can badge your students are going to have potentially have student ideas that can be badges, RFID badges, and maybe you've got a campus layout, you've got an older school, or you've got portables that you need to get to, and kids are going to be going through doors. You know, think about making those badges actually access control. It's not free, but it's not, the costs are coming down, and we're starting to see people considering that, giving access control to the kids, and you can control which doors they can use and schedules and things like that. Biometrics are even coming online where there's eyes and face detection, you know, just the technology on our phones, Bluetooth and smartphone access also options next. And then this is it. We are done. We appreciate your attention and your interest in making it this far through the webinar. Hopefully you didn't fast forward through the whole thing. But Jim and my emails are there. We are available to you. Please, if you have any questions or would like any more information from us, please feel free to email us. This form here is an example of a tool that we use to do evaluations of facilities for clients. If you are a school client and would like us to come evaluate your building, or we could put you in touch with another CPD professional that can also provide an assessment. There's a directory of folks all across the country that can do this, and we're happy to help you any way we can. And a reminder for the architects and things, there's the AIA number for reporting this class. If you actually want to get the health, safety, welfare credit, you need to email us, and you cannot self-report that, and we'll figure out how to work that out for you, but just shoot us an email. And I would like to thank Lieutenant Dan and Lieutenant Lee for being with us today and providing their perspective. Thank you, Jim. Y'all have any parting comments or thoughts, or you want to wrap it up? All right.
I just want to say that we appreciate you thinking about law enforcement and the security aspect in that respect. So we appreciate it very much.
Very good. Invaluable perspective.
Same here, Jim and Bill. Thank you very much for inviting us in here to give us, allow us to at least put some of our thoughts and our experience into some of what you guys are trying to transition some of these schools over to. It's a great idea to involve everybody trying to come up with different ideas. And like CEPTED is not designed for every school. I mean, you got to come up with some things that, that works for your school. Thank you again.
Very good. Thanks, everybody.